Lisa, let's start with this hearing today. It's coming up very shortly. The judge keeps asking for information about these flights as to the day that's going to be the day he gets the answers.
No, I don't think so, because the judge has given them now until March 25th to make a determination on something that they were supposed to answer earlier this week. Are they going to invoke something called the state secrets privilege, or are they going to answer his questions, those 5 questions he had about the details of the first 2 flights that took off on Saturday night? The first thing that he wanted today was just an assurance by somebody with direct knowledge that those conversations about invoking the state secrets privilege were happening at cabinet-level discussions. Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, has now put in a declaration attesting that those conversations indeed were taking place, that he knows that they were because he was involved in them. But beyond that, there is zero detail in Mr. Blanche's declaration today. So at 2:30, do I think Judge Boasberg will have further questions? I do. And in the meantime, Chris, the plaintiffs in this case have submitted papers that include multiple declarations from lawyers for Venezuelans who are believed to have been on those flights. And the declarations from lawyers essentially say, I have been trying to get in touch with my client. He was moved very rapidly from X facility to Y without notice or explanation. I understand from his family members that he thought he was going on that flight. I can't locate him in the ICE detainee database. Here are pictures of his tattoos, which have nothing to do with Tren de Aragua. My client has no criminal history, and on and on and on. If Judge Boasberg has read any of those multiple declarations, you can expect that there will be some questions about that to both the government and the plaintiffs today.
Greg, the president said today that these Venezuelans were part of a bad group that had gone through a strong vetting process. The administration suggests they can't reveal information about the detainees because it amounts to state secrets. Can you explain that and whether it would also preclude them from at least proving to the judge that the people they took out of the U.S. are the alleged gang members the administration says they are?
Typically, when state secrets is raised as an issue by the government in a criminal prosecution and it carries the day, the result typically is that the government simply can't go forward with the prosecution. It's refusing to provide information to the court, and it has the right to do so in certain circumstances. But the flip side of that is that it can't pursue the case. And so sometimes cases are dismissed simply because the government simply can't disclose certain information publicly to the court. The devil's in the details here, though. This will be a very interesting hearing this afternoon. The president's power, any president's power, is really at its peak in the area of national security. So it's not surprising that the administration is trending in that direction as a way of perhaps prevailing in this dispute. But Judge Boasberg is going to have a lot of questions, as Lisa mentioned. This will be a very interesting hearing. This whole episode has created a bit of a sideshow, as we've seen, with calls for impeachment, the Chief Justice weighing in. It's unprecedented in many ways. And today's hearing will, even if it's the last hearing with Judge Boasberg, whatever happens, someone will appeal, and this will not be the end of it.
So, Eddie, Rachel Maddow spoke to the attorney for one of the men detained in El Salvador. She said she chose to reveal his identity because she wanted to get his story out there, and this is part of that.
We feel it's important to let the world know who Andrei, our client, is because he is a human being. He is a young professional from Venezuela. He's a makeup artist. He is a gay man. He is someone who came to the United States seeking protection. He came seeking asylum. Upon entry into the United States, he was detained because of his tattoos, some of which you can see in those photos, but these are not the tattoos of somebody who is involved with gangs. These are normal tattoos that you would see on anybody at a coffee shop anywhere in the United States or Venezuela.
He is one of the people, Eddie, that multiple members of the administration have said are murderers and rapists. They have lumped them all into that general category. So basically, one of the ways the administration has tried to argue this in public is that the ends justify the means. Can you unpack that?
Well, no, the ends do not justify the means by any definition, right? So it seems to me that if one's means are undemocratic, if they fundamentally undermine the basic precepts, values, norms, laws of our country, then the ends do not justify them, right? And so it's important for us to understand that what the administration is doing is in some ways setting the stage for a deep constitutional crisis. And to my mind, Chris, we have to be very, very clear about the values animating the policy. What does it mean to lump all of these folk together? What does it mean to say to a district judge, right, that you have no jurisdiction over what I'm executing here? What does it mean to invoke this particular law as a basis for acting in this way? So it's not quite a sideshow. I would disagree with Greg's this description here, although he was just talking about impeachment. It takes us to the heart of the crisis that we face with the unitary theory of executive power that Donald Trump is enacting here.
So, Greg, let me expand on this. The Times talked today about the administration believing it can use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to justify going into homes without warrants. What are the consequences of that interpretation, and do you think that interpretation could hold?
In short, the consequences are significant, to say the least. Whether they can hold will depend on the judge who first hears the issue and then the appellate courts above him or her. So this is something that's going to be likely litigated up to the Supreme Court eventually. It's an unprecedented use of the law, but it's something that really hasn't been litigated in this particular way before. So we'll see. But I think, as I said, this is likely to end up in the Supreme Court, which will have to answer the question.
But until then, Lisa, obviously people can get caught up in this, right?
Absolutely.
And I want to read a couple of the Associated Press's examples of the people who have gotten caught up in this. They talk about a German tourist who was stopped at the Tijuana crossing, spent over 6 weeks locked up, including over a week in solitary confinement, according to her friend. On the Canadian border, a backpacker from Wales spent nearly 3 weeks at a detention center before flying home this week. And a Canadian woman on a work visa detained at the Tijuana border spent 12 days in detention before returning home, which does beg the question, how long could it be till we get some guidance, ultimately, it sounds like, from the Supreme Court? And what about the people who get caught up with it in the meantime?
Well, a lot of the people that you were just talking about, Chris, are being detained under different legal authorities than the one that the president has used to excuse this deportation of Venezuelans who are alleged members of Tren de Aragua.
It's another example of
Correct.
Unprecedented use of their power.
And so the question that you're asking, though, is when are we going to get some clarity from the Supreme Court? I think it's going to come in bits and pieces. If I had to guess, we'll first get some clarity on his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. But there are other legal authorities that the president is using as part of this mass deportation program overseen and orchestrated by Stephen Miller. One of them is this provision in immigration law that says that the Secretary of State, in his sole discretion, can make a determination that a particular alien's presence in the United States poses potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. That's the statute that's being used right now to excuse the attempted deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, as well as the scholar at Georgetown who has been detained and is being held now in ICE custody, subject to an order from a court that he can't be deported until her further order and evaluation of that situation. But I think we're going to hear from the Supreme Court in drips and drabs, because although this seems to our viewers like it's all of one piece, what they're really doing is sort of using a legal grab bag to justify a series of different actions that they are then using to orchestrate what looks like a broad program of mass deportation.
A grab bag, Eddie, that has moved incredibly fast. And I think history suggests places like Hungary and Turkey, the changes were much slower. It's extremely rare for a leader to just claim power or override the courts. The New York Times quotes a Harvard political scientist who says what we're seeing here is worse. He says, quote, "Honest to God, I've never seen anything like it. These first 2 months have been much more aggressively authoritarian than almost any other comparable case I know of Democratic backsliding." He's someone who literally co-wrote a book on authoritarianism. Is he overstating the case?
No, I think his book on how democracies die is absolutely on point. I think we need to widen the aperture a bit, because what this is, in some ways, you invoke history, Chris. This is in some ways an echo of a very dark period in our country's history, right? When we think about the period between the First World War I and World War II, when we think about the way in which immigration policy took hold, when we think about how Japanese internment, the ways in which German Americans, Italian Americans were treated, when we think about what's driving immigration policy from the 19-teens into the 1920s, what informs the Immigration Act of 1924 is a deep-seated, very noxious and insidious view of who constitutes the American. So the pace of this is unimagined, is mind-boggling on a certain level, but there's also some historical remnant. It's an echo, a rhyming of something in our past that was very, very dark, rooted in a deep and insidious and noxious ideology of white supremacy, Chris. And we need to name it for what it is.